Hello and welcome to another WatchPro original interview. And I'm delighted to say this afternoon that we are joined by John Reardon. Now, to anybody in the United States and in fact most of the world who's a serious collector of Patek Philippe watches, Mr. Reardon will be familiar to you thanks to his time at Sotheby's, then 10 years actually working directly for Patek Philippe USA, and then back into the auction world with Christie's. And now he's taking all of that experience and expertise and pouring it into his own business called collectability.com that we'll talk about in a moment. But first, John, I couldn't really get an expert like you on without just talking about what the hell is happening with Patek Philippe this year, and whether you think what the actions that they've taken have been the right choices, or what.
Well, first, thank you so much for this invitation to be with you today. It's a pleasure and honor, and there's so much to talk about. Where do we begin? The state of Patek Philippe in the world today is strong. I think that the way they've navigated this storm is respectable and consistent with what we've seen, how they've gone against horrible challenges in the past and have come out ahead. There are a couple surprises along the way, most notably when they gave permission to many of the retailers to sell online. That was shocking for me, and I understand that's now no longer policy. Retailers can no longer sell online.
I heard it didn't do spectacularly well for most of the retailers I spoke to. It was quite limited what they were allowed to sell, and it was, it was a good gesture, but I'm not sure it worked out brilliantly.
What I like about it, it was consistent in the sense that it was out of respect to the retailers in a very difficult environment. And I think that happened within the first week or two of the shutdown, at least here in the US, and globally and regionally it was a bit different. So that was a very interesting development. They stopped their Instagram feed for a few weeks, which I found shocking because the rest of us went all digital all the time, as you know. But now they're back, and I saw Nick Fox has a great piece on their IG. So I'm very happy to see they're not normal for sure, but there are some semblance of normal is returning to the Patek Philippe universe. But overall, I see the market as it's been incredibly resilient, and we could talk about modern, vintage, and of course the pre-owned market. There are three separate conversations all wrapped into one.
We sure will. What did you think of them postponing all of their 2020 launches, and we won't see anything new from Patek Philippe until 2021? I mean, if you had your sales and marketing hat at Patek Philippe USA on, would that have been welcome or shock, or how would you have reacted?
I think it was the right decision. It was a conservative reaction, we'll describe it. It was something that made sense because a couple weeks and months ago, even today, no one knows what's next. So they were they're very cautious in making that decision. And I think it'll be a lot of fun to see what's announced next year. And I truly hope that everything is ready for delivery right after the announcement. That will be intriguing. For the first time ever, you could actually buy what's being announced in early in the year.
Well, yeah, that's kind of what I was expecting, and I was speculating and speaking with somebody else in the industry earlier this week about Rolex basically rolling back their retooling for new watches that would have come out for Basel World, and sort of rolling back the state of the factory so that they're keeping their production of their, not necessarily bestsellers, but the lines they were producing all of last year. But I wonder whether they might announce new watches in the fall and have them on sale immediately at the same time, which could create an enormous amount of excitement and energy in the market.
Yeah, and with the new format of the shows, I mean, all the rules are thrown out the window in terms of timing and deliveries. I think 2021 is literally going to be an unbelievably exciting year for Rolex and for Patek Philippe in particular. And the decisions they made over the last few weeks and months, we'll find out soon enough if it was the right call. But I think history will judge them in a positive manner.
Yeah. And what do you think that this shut down for the best part of 3 or 4 months worldwide by the time we're sort of through it. What do you think the effect will be on the secondary market? And I would distinguish between the secondary market where you've got, flippers turning Nautiluses
Yes.
and Aquanauts and what have you, with the very other end of the scale, which I think is where collectability comes in, which is rare, vintage, unusual, hard to get watches. I mean, how do you think those two distinct markets are going to perform, or are performing now?
It's incredible how well they've performed the market has performed over the last few weeks. When the shutdown occurred, I was positive that it would be a total, complete shutdown. Right? Who needs a watch when you can't even go out to dinner anymore? And it was scary. And my phone stopped ringing immediately. But after a few days, collectors were reaching out. I think we're all hearing the same thing, saying, "I'm bored. I want to buy something." And they were taking the time to research and to study, and transactions were occurring. Speaking to other dealers around the world, the same thing was happening. Transactions were occurring. I'm talking vintage in particular, and people were buying and selling, discussing with some of the buyers who are in the, we'll call it, flipping business, buying Nautilus and trying to make 5-10% or more very quickly. They were more concerned because that business, all of a sudden, it's the margins are tight, and the commodity market is something that is not as resilient in most cases. However, after a short dip that we saw back in March, it's come back strongly and almost to pre-COVID levels. And I'm talking specifically with the hard-to-get pre-owned Patek Philippe models, Nautilus, Aquanaut, some of the complicated watches. So things aren't as bad as they could have been. I think a lot of people have this idea of flight to safety in the watch world, and people are buying pieces to preserve assets, and in some cases they hope they could actually, they could wear their watches hopefully outside someday, but they could actually it's not about investment, but it's about a conservative allocation of resources. And that's what Patek Philippe is about for a lot of the people that are buying for more monetary reasons. We'll talk about collecting later, but I mean, from a market perspective, it's been solid.
Yeah, I mean, I got the feeling that, I mean, it feels ridiculous to talk about Patek Philippe's and Rolexes as commodities, but I suppose that when you're talking about flipping them, they are just assets that have a value that's rising and falling. I think my impression has been that the prices for Patek has held up more strongly than for Rolex. I think there probably has been a bit of a softening in subs and GMTs and whatever, maybe 10 to 20%. And on the sell side, so if you're actually trying to trade in your watches, you're being offered some pretty horrible prices, and those deals aren't getting done. So the market is a little bit stuck at the moment.
Yeah, and I think for Patek Philippe, it was a 5 to 10% dip at its worst. But now, especially watching the results from some of the online auctions, Sotheby's and Christie's are having, Phillips is about to have one. The prices are good, surprisingly good. In some cases, better than good. We saw that 5711 in platinum sell at Sotheby's for $484,000 US, and that was back in April when the sky was truly falling. To see a price of an online watch on Nautilus, modern Nautilus, bringing such a strong result, it was very encouraging for the industry. And I thought it could have been an anomaly, but it's become more of the trend. We're seeing strong numbers across the board.
Yeah. What do you make of all these online auctions, these timed auctions that have sprung up? They do seem to have been, I think they've caught the auction houses by surprise at how successful they've been.
I think it's a very punctuated move of the evolution of how the world does business, and in every category, everyone's where there's a will, there's a way. And we're seeing it with watches in particular, and the auction houses had to adjust quickly. Sotheby's led the charge with the weekly online auctions, and that was, I mean, the results, as we just discussed, were impressive, and they continue just to churn out more and more sales every week from Geneva, New York, and Hong Kong. So that's been interesting to gauge the retail marketplace at auction. But the big test is Christie's just announced a large live sale that they'll be having in Hong Kong next month.
Yeah.
This is arguably one of the bigger Patek Philippe offerings we've seen in the last 5, even 10 years at auction. And to see that and the results will be very telling on the high end of the retail vintage and pre-owned marketplace. So fingers crossed that will be a strong sale for them. And we're also anxiously awaiting to see what happens with Phillips and Christie's late June Geneva sales. If they happen, I know catalogs are starting to circulate. That will be very telling for how resilient this marketplace truly is.
And it is from your vantage point now, and with your contacts, do you get the impression that there are more watches being consigned to auction as well? Because I would have thought the volume would have been the issue when you're doing weekly. And I think Christie's is now more than weekly, isn't it? Because of their different offices around the world doing these online auctions. I mean, was there always that much product around when it was just sale room auctions?
The problem for the big auction houses right now is logistics. Like, for example, the New York offices are all closed. You can't get in or out. So there's going to be a waiting game, whether you're buying a watch or consigning a watch. In Asia, I know things are starting to open up a bit quicker. And just last week, the Geneva office for the houses started to reopen. Once you get over the logistics that you could actually ship in or out, then it gets easier for consignment. But what we're all missing is the in-person contact with the consignment. When I work for auction, it's all about sitting down with a family face to face and discussing that big decision, whether or not to sell grandfather's watch or not.
Yeah.
All of that is now being done digitally. So yes, there's a lot of product coming on board, especially from dealers and from the trade that we'll be seeing at auction. I think there'll be less fresh to market offerings in the immediate future, just due to these logistical nightmares. But over time, the market speaks for itself. If prices are strong, pieces will surface.
But I guess if supply increases dramatically, what I'm getting at is, are people dumping watches at the moment from the trade in particular? So if people are trying to liquidate into cash as much as possible, then that could have an effect on future prices.
And that is a wonderful point. And I think we have to divide between modern and vintage for that. For modern, I fully expect once all of these retailers open worldwide, unfortunately, there'll be too much on the marketplace, and we'll see a further dip with modern pricing. Because all of a sudden, all these retailers need to play catch up over the last few months. They have rent to pay, they have bills to pay, and that's going to result most likely in discounting. With vintage, the supply is so tight. The classic little old lady who takes out a 25-26 doesn't happen every day. So the supply problem won't there will not be an oversupply problem, in my opinion. I do wonder what happens once Italy opens up, because there's so many great vintage watches, in particular Patek Philippe, locked up in Italy. And I wonder if people in their 70s and 80s will start selling. And we could be on the verge of a renaissance of offerings of these incredible pieces surfacing. Only time will tell.
So watches that we haven't seen for a very long time, if ever.
Yes. Yeah. There's still a lot out there that we've only seen archive pictures of, and we only dream of seeing come up on the marketplace.
Now I know you spend all day, every day, basically speaking to collectors, buying, selling. This is a pretty wealthy community that you're talking about. So I'm not without asking you to betray any confidences, but I mean, even the rich have been hit by this particular crisis, and hit pretty hard. They'll probably bounce back better. They're going to be better prepared to get through it. But do you think that the real high net worth individuals' behaviour might change a little bit in terms of their relationship with their collectibles?
What a wonderful question. I'm going to answer that specifically from an American perspective, to be fair, and then we'll go more global. What I see in the States is a lot of guilt right now, perhaps appropriately guilt. A lot of the entrepreneurs and the business owners that I speak to have recently been taking significant, I don't want to get into politics, but they're getting a lot of money from the government that they didn't expect that they'd get, thanks to all of the various cut and waived debt that they're receiving. So for many people, they're quietly and almost guiltily admitting times are okay. And this is a very small subsection of people. And they feel very, how do you put it? I keep coming back to the word guilty, but it's their guilty pleasure to be buying watches. They want to keep it discreet. They're not going outside their house wearing a Richard Mille, driving the latest Ferrari anymore. They want something that's very discreet that they could enjoy and learn about and keep in their homes. And Patek Philippe kind of fits within that philosophy. So there's a lot of that going on in the United States right now. I'd say the market is, at least the market players, there's new high-end buyers coming to the market already. There are people from real estate who've seen see what's happening with the values of what they're playing with. They're looking at watches as another alternative. So this is specific to the US. I don't know if it's happening worldwide. I've spoken to numerous collectors in the Middle East. They're buying out of sheer pleasure, more less from an investment perspective, more from a collecting perspective. And in Asia, I've heard both the positive and negative storylines of collectors. But on the highest of the high end, collectors keep on collecting. It's a disease they can't shake. And that's indicates that the high end of the market will remain solid. But the new blood that's coming in and pouring money in on the lower side, meaning under 50,000 US, I think we're going to start seeing shifts in auctions of offerings and sell-through rates. I actually predict the next series of auctions are going to do quite well.
Going to do quite well, did you say? Sorry, I missed that.
Yes, I think we're going to see 90% sell-through rates plus, and very some more records being falling. And once people see in public auctions prices records falling, then more people jump into the game. So it's in a world where there's so much negativity, because every chart I look at is a downward spiral. With the watch world, in certain segments, it's an upward trend, and it's compounded by the fact that more people are learning about how Patek Philippe has weathered the storms over past 100 years and how they're doing it now. So I know I'm a little rose-colored glasses optimistic here. I always say, when someone has to choose between a meal and a watch, the meal wins. However, once basic needs are met, watches are fundamentally something that's very desirable for a lot of people, and they'll keep chasing them.
Mm. How much of a connectivity is there between the new watch market, the new luxury watch market, and the pre-owned and vintage watch market? Do they rise and fall at the same time and at the same sort of percentages, or are they much more decoupled than that?
It's they are decoupled, but they're part of one larger organism for sure. The markets are tied. Everything modern will become pre-owned, will become vintage someday. So that fundamentally is the first point. But a lot of collectors have a hybrid collection, multiple brands, of course, but they also have vintage and modern mixed in. The trend, since we last met in London a few years ago, has been modern collectors selling off their collection and diversifying into vintage, and we continue to see that today. The strange thing is, when people buy vintage, they typically keep the watches. You don't see people flipping vintage. They buy them, they keep them, they treasure them. They follow market values, but they don't sell. Unfortunately, once a great collector has a great watch, we're not going to see that piece for a generation. With modern, I mean, it's a commodity market. There's a lot of coming and going, and a lot of people don't keep their watches for as long as they should or would expect. There's a lot of temptation when you could double or triple your money with a modern watch, and money often steers people down that road.
I just wonder about the sort of broader sweep of the new watch market. If we emerge from this crisis and people don't want to be seen, as you mentioned a moment ago, driving flash cars and having a flash watch on their wrist, and therefore the primary market is soft, would that necessarily lead to the secondary and vintage markets being soft as well?
I think overall we're going to see, and this is across all brands, there will be prices going downward. There'll be oversupply, and I don't think the demand can keep up with it. And but we're also going to see, and this is just proved every single era historically, the best pieces will keep bringing more. And it's ironic that even the Great Depression had some of Patek Philippe's greatest golden era production pieces ever made came from that time. And the collectors that we all talk about, Graves and Packard, they were the ones that weathered that storm. So I kind of think we're in this new era that it's really gonna, the best pieces will separate from the pack. I do believe that brands, I think they already have, will go out of business. There will be markets that will collapse with certain collecting categories. But at the same time, and the high end, we're going to see just an expansion of prices going upward.
Mm. Well, I might finish this interview in a moment by asking you what's your best advice for a watch to buy now in terms of, never waste a good crisis. There should be opportunities around about now or in the coming couple of months to pick up a real great watch that could be treasured for 20 years and be a great investment. So I'll let you ruminate on that. But I wanted to ask you about your new career. You've left the relative security of the venerable auction world and the equally venerable Patek Philippe world to set up a .com, collectability.com. I'm imagining that the website is probably a small tip of the arrow, and there's a lot more behind it. Tell me about why you moved into to starting your own business.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. After 20 something years of working for others, large companies and wonderful companies at that, it was time. Even over the last 10 years, I've had this dream, even longer, to start my own business. As you know, when you work for an auction house, you're expected to be an expert in every single brand imaginable. And going in and doing a valuation of 10 Franck Muellers, to me, is equivalent to chewing sandpaper. I have no interest in doing that whatsoever. In terms of Rolex, I'm not an expert in Rolex, and I choose to delegate and share that with others. But when it comes to Patek Philippe, that's 24/7. That's what I want to talk about. And I enjoy teaching, sharing, comparing, debating with fellow collectors and experts. And that's what collectability is all about. It's not a .com. I'll describe that as kind of like the PR arm. I've always wanted to imagine a Hodinkee that just focused on only Patek Philippe. That's kind of the idea of really story driven, and that's interesting and exciting in itself. But the real business is typically the watches that people don't see online. And I've had the pleasure over the last 6 months of have some really interesting pieces coming and going that are going directly from private families to private collectors, and that's good fun. The .com has allowed me to share my message to the world, my philosophy, my collecting style, and hopefully some ideas and experiences. And it's allowed families that might have a piece contact me and say, hey, what's my watch? And in the US, half of all Patek Philippe's in history, up until 1960, were sold in the United States. So there's a lot of treasure hunting to do here. And even though I can't travel as I did in the past, we do have FedEx, and we do have UPS, and we do have United States Mail. So I'm able to get watches, and we're able to transact. So collectability, in short, is here to help people. I answer questions nonstop through multiple platforms. And I'm not associated officially in any way with Patek Philippe. However, I do write for the magazine. I continue to have a column in the magazine. I'm very close. I have many friends there. And being completely independent of the auction houses now, I'm able to give my opinion on not only the marketplace, but on individual references in a way that's completely unedited. And in the past, I had to be cautious of everything that I had to say, especially when you work for the brand itself. You have to be very careful what words you say.
Oh, yeah.
But now I'm independent. I could share my opinion on a watch I could share my opinion on a reference, and I enjoy engaging with those conversations all day long.
And has it been has it gone well for you? I mean, obviously these are incredibly difficult times. Are you yearning for the security of a paycheck from Christie's right now, or are you okay?
Not at all. I am so glad I made this decision. And when you ask many entrepreneurs, they say the same thing: is I wish I did it sooner. And I truly wish I did this years ago. But you live every day at a time, and I'm very excited about the future. Regarding the present, I am shocked of how quickly the business has grown. I'm shocked how March and April were two of my best months. I thought business would stop, but things keep growing as the word gets out of what I'm doing. I'm essentially buying and selling vintage Patek Philippe, and there are other players in the marketplace who are friends that I respect, and I think there's enough room to have someone focused on only Patek Philippe, and that's my place. And I hope to be doing this for many years. I will not go back to auction. I'm saying that on the record. I am done with auction.
Yeah, well, that's their loss is our gain if we've got a really strong independent voice out there. And is the model for collectability that you're actually buying the watches, servicing, authenticating, and then selling on, or is it more on consignment from people that you trust?
Yeah, I tried the consignment with 2 pieces only, and I very quickly came to the realization I don't want to be a consignment business. I want to own everything that I sell. It's very different experience when you have a piece that you put your own money behind, and the way that you look at that piece, you obsess and research over that piece, as opposed to a consignment, which of course you care about, but it's not at the same level. So I'm buying everything. Their piece, everything on the website I own personally, and that's a model that I'd like to continue using moving forward. I've had a number of people ask, in particular dealers, to consign on my site, and that's not a business I'm interested in. If someone brings me a $24.99 and I happen not to have $2 million sitting around, that's a consignment opportunity that I would discuss. But everything on the website is purely is buy and sell.
There's some terrific looking watches on there. Some watches I've certainly never seen before. I don't recognise them at all. And so I guess we'll finish with your perfect investment advice for a watch to buy right now. It always feels to me like I would, even if I could, unless I could buy at retail, I'm not going to be buying a Nautilus or an Aquanaut. So we'll rule those out. We'll rule those out. It always strikes me that you can get a lot of complication and precious metal from Patek Philippe rather than buying steel watches. But what's your advice?
It's a great question. First of all, the rules have not changed. Even though we're in the middle of a pandemic, you buy for condition first. And that might take time for you to find what you want to wear and it's acceptable condition. And there's some collectors that wait years to find the perfect watch, and that's part of the fun. Secondary to condition is the rarity. I mean, you're buying a Patek Philippe, odds are it's rare compared to other makers. Fundamentally, it's a supply and demand game. But once you find a watch that's wearable, or it's something that you'd love to put on your mantle, if it's a clock, or if it's I've been having a lot of fun with Patek Philippe lighters recently. If you want to light a cigar with your Patek Philippe lighter, there are the pieces out there that you can buy and enjoy. So in terms of specific references, I'd love to talk about pocket watches, but I won't get into that. I'm a big fan of Patek Philippe pocket watches. But I love right now the reference 3940, which is quickly becoming one of the hottest references out there, which a year ago would have been considered impossible. I'm also a big fan of 3970s, which are starting to show a heartbeat on the market, which over the last 20 years have been very, very stable. I'm still a believer in early steel Nautilus. I mean, nothing beats a nice 3700 with its original box and everything. So basically my answer today is the same as it would have been 6 months or a year ago. is buy something that speaks to you, but do your due diligence to make sure that you're buying something of the quality you think you're actually getting. And that's the fun of collecting, because you might not even know what you're looking for until you see it.
And make sure you're enjoying it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. They're not just dollar signs, because
Exactly.
one thing we've learned over the last few weeks, at the end of the day, you have a watch. We've all been saying that, and now that's truer than ever. Is a lot of people are locked up in their homes with their collections, and it's their quiet pleasure.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, it's been a real pleasure speaking to you again, John, and I'm looking forward to getting over to New York and seeing you there, or see me here in London. So for now,
to get over soon.
Exactly. Well, stay safe, and hopefully it won't be long before we see each other.
Absolutely, my pleasure, and thanks for your time.
Great, thanks, John.